Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. I'm Mark Banicevich, and today I'm very lucky to spend time with Nick Summerfield. Hey Nick, how are you doing?
Good, Mark, how are you?
Good. It's great to have you today.
Thank you.
Nick is a partner at Anthony Harper, which is a law firm here in New Zealand, and he is a specialist in financial services law. And the subject that we want to talk in detail about today is around the director's duties, and in particular we want to focus on the core director's duty around acting in the best interests of the company, which has actually been broadened quite recently. So thank you very much for your time, Nick.
My pleasure.
Can we start then with a little bit of an introduction to this particular duty? I think if we focus on that today.
Yeah, so this is one of the director's duties that's set out in the Companies Act. I think this differs from some of the more specific duties around trading and so on, in that it's quite a broad obligation. So what it says is that directors must act in good faith and in what they believe to be the best interests of the company. And as you've said, Mark, so that's been expanded recently, moving from a pure kind of profit maximisation. Our job is to maximise the value for shareholders, to one where directors of New Zealand companies are now specifically able to take into account broader ESG considerations.
Okay, great, thank you. So what does acting in good faith mean?
Yeah, great question. And I guess that's why there's lawyers in the world, isn't it? I kind of think acting in good faith is sort of a, well, look, it's really hard to explain in the abstract, but it's something I think people objectively know. It's effectively going out and doing right by the company. You're there as a director of this company and doing the best you can for its shareholders and for its business purpose, and kind of coming in it clean and engaging in the type of conduct that you would want others to when they were acting for you.
Right, so this is quite heavily tied up with conflicts of interest, right? Because that would be an example of a situation where a director may be encourage or have the incentive to act in their own interests or in the interests of somebody they know rather than the interests of the company. And it might be, for example, arranging a contract with a third-party business, and it just happens to be somebody you know. Well, is that the right choice for the company, or is it purely because you've got a mate in the system? So it's kind of those sorts of things would tie in there, wouldn't they?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're there wearing your hat as a director of the company, and you have to park those sort of outside interests that you've got at the door. There are some exceptions for that if you're part of a wider corporate group, for example, but you're there to do the best for that company. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess another example of that is where you've got a noisy shareholder or a majority shareholder who wants you to act in their interests.
Yep.
And that may, even if they're the 100% shareholder, there may be instances where acting in the shareholder's interest is not acting in the interest of the company, mightn't there?
Yeah, there can be. Certainly the example of the vocal minority, maybe shareholder, or the powerful shareholder you're kind of used to acting on the instructions of, is a difficult one. And there is a balance there, of course. A little bit different if it's a 100% owned shareholder. That can kind of be a little bit more straightforward in practice. But you're right. It can involve hard conversations when you genuinely disagree with what you're being asked to do. Yeah.
And you mentioned before this modification to the law that's happened recently about environmental, social and governance factors. How does that change this duty?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. I think it's a phrase, but the jury's out on that.
We don't know yet because it's too new.
Yeah, well, it is new. And there's an element of kind of being guided a little bit by what's happened in other countries around the world, particularly with ESG and climate change and so on and so on. But it's difficult. If you ask a legal purist, they would probably say there was no need to change the law. And in fact, I think lawyers generally are of that view, and it was perfectly acceptable before to look at those wider factors rather than just the pure corporate money-making element. But I think it's a signal that it is clearly acceptable to look at those factors, and that's the way I think the law is moving, particularly around climate change and those broader responsibilities of directors.
Yeah, I think that suggestion that you make it that it's a signal is a really nice way to put it. That the law itself hasn't really significantly changed. It's just told directors that it's okay to look at environmental factors, it's okay to look at the impact of the company on its society and so forth.
Yeah.
As well as so acting in the best interest of the company can include acting in the best interest of the broader society and the environment and so forth.
Yeah, for sure, and your customers and your employees and, as you say, society in general, right? Companies are just a means to an end in a way, and there is more for directors to consider than just the pure bottom line, for sure. Right,
great, thank you. So if a director breaches the duty, what are they on the hook for?
Yeah, well, no good news on that one, I'm afraid. Directors breaching directors' duties can be personally liable. They don't necessarily need to be at fault in the sense of they can genuinely believe they are doing the right thing, and the law will look objectively at whether or not the director has met their duty as compared to whether you or I think we have when we're doing that job. I suppose I would flip that round, of course, and say, well, in theory, acting in good faith, it's for the most part not a difficult threshold to meet. Mm-hmm. If you come at your directorship with a professional outlook in a way where you're genuinely kind of there for the right reasons, then it should be reasonably just easy to do that, to act in good faith and act in the best interests of the company. Yes, sometimes you have to stop and think about it, you might need advice, but by and large, it shouldn't be too tricky.
It does probably suggest, though, that as a director, it's not okay not to understand your duties, that and how to be a good director. Yep. So get some training. You've got to be a prudent and good director to do this job. And if you go in there incompetent and something goes wrong, you're on the hook for that. Absolutely, right?
Yeah, for sure. And the law's pretty unforgiving for directors who don't pay due attention to their role, or who go, well, that looking at this particular document or looking in financial statements is outside of my wheelhouse, I'm not interested. That doesn't bode well in the courts. So, you do have to take the time to understand your obligations, take the time to really commit to the role, but provided you do all that stuff,
you'll be fine. What are the possible liabilities for those sorts of breaches?
So you're talking mainly civil liability for breach of directors' duties, which is effectively the cost.
Big fine.
Yeah, well, big damages. We saw that in Mainzeal. Huge dollar sum damages that directors were found responsible for. Worst case, if you're genuinely acting in bad faith and sort of meet some other pretty tricky criteria, you can be looking at criminal liability.
Prison time?
5 years. If you're really bad, Mark.
I'd rather not be, thank you.
That's exactly right. But look, there are some scary numbers and some potential risks there, but it's about, taking the time to do the right thing, getting advice if you're unsure, working as a board together.
Right. So the threshold for criminal liability is a lot higher. It's more around intention and actually doing the wrong thing deliberately.
Yeah, that's right.
And the liability, the civil liability, potentially more around negligence or.
Unfortunately, that's right. Criminal, you have to kind of go out and try to be bad,
right?
Effectively. So that's not something for a director to be particularly concerned about day to day. Civil liability for breach of director duties. Yep, that is a possibility even for sort of an accidental or inadvertent breach.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. Now, you mentioned before that it's not okay to look past the financials if you're not a financial person. Is there an extent to which a director can rely on the expertise in the room?
Yeah, you can. It's really interesting. There's a couple of competing priorities here. You start with this concept of board collective responsibility. We've been appointed directors together, we make joint decisions and so on, and therefore we're all responsible for that.
Yes.
The flip side is that the Companies Act does recognise some reasonably limited circumstances where you can rely on others. So you can rely, on expert advice, so a lawyer or an accountant, for example, acting within the type of work they do. In certain circumstances, you can rely on a sort of a properly formed delegated subcommittee of directors or employees. But you're talking about, a need to be doing that in good faith and being, comfortable that it's appropriate to rely on this person. They've got their expertise.
So it sounds like it's an explicit delegation rather than a sitting back and saying, no, they know what they're doing, I'm okay here.
Yeah, certainly in terms of delegation to other directors for that purpose, yes, it's explicit. Beyond that, it's more around, specifically considering whether this person who's sitting in front of me is qualified and competent to advise me on this, testing them, asking questions, and really kind of, as you say, it's a lot more than going, they know what they're talking about, I don't need to ask. You certainly need to drill home and be confident that you're getting the right information and it's being tested.
Great. Well, on this this concept of acting in good faith and in the best interest of the company, that law in particular applies to companies. How is it different for incorporated societies?
It's a good question. That there are different standards for different types of bodies. As you said, this is Directors Act, Companies Act, Director Duties. For incorporated societies, the law's in a state of flux at the moment. We're moving from an old existing regime dating back from 1908 to a newer regime. It's fair to say the old kind of previous law isn't as considered around these types of things.
Let's focus on the new law.
Well, that's right. There's a pathway to get there. Yes, look, I would say apply the same types of concepts, regardless of the entity you're in, and come to the role and give it the attention and seriousness that it warrants.
So we can come back and have another conversation when the Incorporated Societies Act passes and becomes law.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, one final question for you today then. What advice would you give to a new director?
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing I would say is that being a director is really rewarding, or being in a governance role, regardless of the type of organisation, is really rewarding. It's a great way to apply your skills in a different way. It's something that you can do alongside your existing role if you want to, or something that become a pathway for a career in of itself. I guess beyond that, in terms of specific advice, probably comes through in my lawyer's approach to risk, which is, make sure you're asking questions, make sure you're understanding the business. If you have a question, probably someone else does as well. Take the time to understand, analyse, test, and really get involved in the nitty-gritty. And not only is that where you add the most value from a governance perspective, then it will help you from a risk perspective as well. Great.
Okay, well, Nick, thank you very much for your time today. Great conversation. I'll look forward to catching up with you again soon, in about 15 minutes. And see you all next episode.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure.